she was worth $4 billion. He charged $90 an hour to fix broken pipes. The night he showed up at her door with a toolbox and a 7-year-old asleep in his truck, neither of them expected to find anything except a busted water main. But behind that flooded basement wall was a secret that 3 men in $1,000 suits had already killed to keep buried. And now that Grayson Hale had seen it, they were coming for him too. What happens when the most powerful woman in the room realizes the only person she can trust is the man she almost turned away at the door? If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Hit that like button and stay with me until the end. This one is worth it. The rain had been falling since noon, and by 9 o'clock it wasn't falling anymore. It was hammering. Sheets of it came sideways off the ridge behind Callaway Drive, bending the young oak trees along the curb and turning the gutters into fast brown rivers. The kind of rain that made people stay inside, check their roofs, and feel quietly grateful for whatever small dry shelter they had managed to build for themselves. Grayson Hale did not have that option. He was crouched under the kitchen sink of a split-level ranch on Pember Lane, his boots soaked through from a slow leak he'd been tracking for 40 minutes, when his phone buzzed against the linoleum floor beside his knee. He ignored it. He was trying to figure out if the compression fitting was original to the house, or if some previous amateur had replaced it with the wrong size. And the answer mattered because the wrong size meant the whole section needed to come out. And if that happened, his Tuesday had just become his Wednesday. The phone buzzed again. He picked it up without looking, tucked it between his ear and his shoulder. Hale Repair. Is this actually a person? Not a recording? The voice was controlled, but just barely. The kind of voice that was used to being composed and was working hard to stay that way. It's a person, Grayson said. What do you need? My basement is flooding. I'm at 14 Callaway Drive. I think I'm your neighbor, actually, across the street. I need someone tonight, not tomorrow, and I've already called 2 other companies and both of them said they couldn't come out in this weather. How bad is the flooding? A pause. He could hear water in the background. Not a drip. A rush. There are about 4 inches on the floor. It's still coming in. Grayson closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. He had 30 minutes of work left on Pember Lane, a daughter asleep in the back of his truck in the driveway, and a body that had been going since 6 that morning. None of that was this woman's problem. I'll be there in 45 minutes, he said. He heard what might have been relief, quickly swallowed. Thank you, Thank you. He finished Pember Lane in 28 minutes, wrote the invoice on a damp notepad, left it under the customer's windshield wiper because nobody answered the door, and walked back to his truck. He stood there for a moment with the rain pouring off the brim of his cap and looked in the back window. Maya was curled against her booster seat with her mouth open slightly. Her stuffed rabbit, she called it Benny, she had called every stuffed rabbit Benny since she was 2, tucked under her chin. She'd been asleep since 8, somewhere between the last job and this one. She was used to it. He hated that she was used to it. He got in the truck quietly, adjusted the heater so the warmth would reach the back seat, and pulled out onto the wet road. 14 Callaway Drive was not the kind of house you noticed at first. Not because it was small. It was the biggest house on the block, set back from the road behind a black iron fence and a long gravel drive that had been recently repaved. But whoever had designed the landscaping had chosen tall hedges and mature trees that screened most of the facade from the street, and there were very few lights on at night. For the 8 months Grayson had lived across the road, he had assumed the place was either a vacation property or a very private family that didn't want to be spoken to. He had been half right. He pulled into the drive, cut the engine, and sat for a moment. The rain hadn't let up. He looked back at Maya, still out cold, and cracked the windows half an inch. She'd been fine in the truck 100 times. He'd be 40 feet away. He told himself this in the way he told himself a lot of things lately, quickly, without dwelling. He grabbed his bag and ran for the front door. The woman who opened it before he could knock was not what he'd expected, though he couldn't have said exactly what he had expected. She was around 30, with dark hair pulled back in the kind of knot that suggested it had been neat several hours ago. She was wearing a gray sweatshirt with the sleeves pushed up and jeans that had water stains on the knees, and she was holding a mop that she clearly had not stopped using until the exact moment she came to the door. "Grayson Hale," she said. "That's me." She stepped back to let him in. The entry hall was tall-ceilinged and mostly bare, a few boxes stacked against the wall, a coat rack with one jacket on it, a mirror that hadn't been hung yet, leaning against the baseboard. She'd moved in recently. The house had that particular emptiness of a space that hadn't been filled yet. "Vivian Sterling," she said, already moving toward the back of the house. "The basement stairs are through the kitchen." He followed her. The kitchen was large and barely used. A bowl with some crackers on the counter, a half-empty glass of water, a laptop open on the island showing what looked like a spreadsheet before she flipped it shut as they passed. She wasn't being secretive about it, or if she was too tired to be smooth about it. The basement stairs opened up at the far end of a hallway. Even before she opened the door, he could hear it, a low gurgling sound, the kind that meant water was moving where water shouldn't be. She opened the door and turned on the lights. The basement was finished, or had been. Drywall panels, a nice floor that had been laminate wood look, a built-in shelving unit along the far wall, probably a home office at some point, or maybe a media room. Now there were 4 inches of dark water covering every inch of the floor, and it was swirling very gently near the center of the room, which meant it was still actively coming in from somewhere. "Okay," Grayson said. He wasn't alarmed exactly, but he was focused now. He looked at her. "Can you tell me where your main shutoff is?" She hesitated for just long enough that he knew she didn't know. "It's fine," he said. "Newer houses usually keep it in the utility closet or near the water heater. Do you know where your water heater is?" "I think there's a door in the back left. I'm going in. Do you have waders?" "I don't have waders." "That's fine. My boots are already shot for the night." He looked at her feet. She was in socks. "Don't come in unless you need to." He went down the stairs and felt the water close around his ankles before he hit the bottom step. Cold. Not freezing, but cold enough that his jaw tightened. He moved through the room carefully, feeling for the floor with each step because the water was murky enough that he couldn't see his feet. The door in the back left open to a utility space, water heater, air handler, the guts of the house. He found the main shutoff on the second try, a red valve handle behind the water heater that was corroded enough that it took both hands and a grunt to get it to move. The rushing sound stopped. He stood there in the sudden quiet and let out a breath. "Did that work?" Vivian called from the top of the stairs. "It stopped coming in," he called back. "I'm going to find the source." It took him 14 minutes to find it. The main supply line to the basement ran along the base of the east wall, behind the drywall, and somewhere in that run there was a fitting that had failed. He could tell because one section of drywall was bulged out and slightly darker than the rest, and when he pressed on it, it gave like a sponge. He went back upstairs. Vivian was standing at the top of the stairs with a towel in her hand, which she held out to him. He took it, surprised. "It's a failed fitting inside the east wall," he said, drying his hands. "I need to open up the drywall to get to it. The repair itself is probably 2 hours, maybe less. The wall patching is a separate job." She nodded. She had that expression people sometimes got when something expensive and complicated was happening to their house. Not panic exactly, more like the careful measurement of how much this was going to cost, and whether she could absorb it without changing her face. "What do I owe you for tonight?" she said. "Let me finish the job first. I want to know the number before you start." He respected that. "Service call plus emergency rate, probably $250 for parts and labor on the fitting. The drywall is extra if you want me to patch it. I usually subcontract that out." She held his gaze for a moment. "Fine. Do it." He went back down. He'd been working for maybe 20 minutes. He'd gotten the damaged section of drywall off and was examining the fitting with his headlamp when he heard her on the stairs. She'd put on rubber boots from somewhere. She waded to a dry spot near the stairs where there was a stack of boxes on a shelf and started going through one of them. He almost said something about the water, then didn't. She'd made her own decision. He was pulling the failed fitting section when his headlamp caught something on the far side of the cavity he'd opened in the wall. He stopped. At first he thought it was part of the house's infrastructure, a junction box maybe, or some kind of utility cabinet that had been built into the cavity. But the shape was wrong. It was a safe. A small one, brushed steel, recessed into a carved-out section of the framing that had been done deliberately and carefully, the kind of recess that someone had planned ahead of time, not improvised. Grayson looked at it for a few seconds. Then he looked back at the pipe. He fixed the pipe. He crimped the new fitting, tested the connection, went upstairs and turned the main shutoff back on, came back down and stood in 4 inches of water for 3 minutes, listening for any sound of a leak. Nothing. The repair was solid. He looked at the safe again. He almost didn't say anything. It wasn't his business. He was there to fix a pipe and leave. "There's a safe in your wall," he called toward the stairs. A pause. Then the water moved and she was beside him, her headlamp crossing his, both of them looking at the same thing. "I didn't know that was there," she said. Her voice was flat, but he'd been listening to people react to unexpected things in their houses for 6 years, and flat wasn't the same as surprised. Flat was the voice of someone who was being careful. "A lot of previous owners put them in," he said, giving her the out. She didn't take it. She stood there looking at the safe and something shifted in her face, a kind of calculation that moved through her expression and left it tighter than before. "I need to think," she said, more to herself than to him. He respected that too. He began replacing his tools. "That's out." He was carrying his bag to the stairs when he heard her, very quietly, say his name. "Mr. Hale." He turned. She was still standing in front of the open wall cavity, the water around her boots, the safe sitting there in the beam of her headlamp. "I know this is not your problem," she said, "and I have no right to ask you anything else tonight. Okay? The combination, I think I know what it is." She looked at him. "Would you stay while I open it?" He thought about Maya in the truck. He thought about his body, which had been going for 15 hours. He thought about the expression on this woman's face, which was not fear exactly, but was something adjacent to it. "Yeah," he said. "I'll stay." So, she knew the combination on the third try. The safe door swung open. Inside, a brown accordion file folder, rubber-banded shut. A USB drive taped to the inside of the folder with a piece of masking tape, and a handwritten note on a half sheet of yellow legal paper that had been folded twice. She reached in and took the folder first. The rubber band snapped when she tried to remove it, dry from age. Inside were documents. A lot of them. Grayson couldn't read them from where he stood, but he could see they were financial in nature. Columns of numbers, account information, names in bold at the top of certain pages. Vivian was reading. He watched her face change. Not all at once. It went in stages, the way a body reacts to cold water. First the tightening around the eyes, then the jaw, then the particular stillness that came when someone was trying to hold themselves very steady because they were afraid of what would happen if they stopped. She read for a long time. He didn't rush her. He set his bag down and leaned against the wall and waited. Finally, she looked up at him. "I need to ask you something," she said, "and I need you to answer honestly." "All right." "In the last 3 months, have you seen anyone approach this house? A car that sat outside too long? Someone who seemed to be watching the property?" The question surprised him. "I'm usually not home until late." "But you might have noticed." He thought about it. "There was a black SUV, maybe 3 weeks ago. It was parked at the end of the drive for about an hour. I noticed it because I was waiting for a pizza delivery, and I went out twice. Both times it was there." She closed her eyes for half a second. "Thank you." "What's in the folder?" She seemed to weigh something. How much to say? How much to trust? He'd seen that calculation before too, usually in people who had been burned. "Records," she said. "Financial records that were taken from my company's secure server about 14 months ago. Records that disappeared during an audit investigation that cost the company, considerable resources to cover." She looked at the folder. "I thought they were gone." "Who would have put them here?" "Someone who found them and didn't know what else to do with them." She paused. "Or someone who was keeping them safe until they needed them." "What do they show?" She looked at him directly. "That 3 of my senior executives have been moving company funds into accounts I have no visibility into, and that they have been doing it for almost 2 years. The basement was quiet except for the water, which was slowly settling." "Okay," Grayson said. "Okay," she repeated, like she was surprised that was his response. "What do you want to do with it?" She looked at the folder. She looked at the USB drive. She looked at the handwritten note, which she had read and then folded back along its original creases with a careful deliberateness that told him it contained something personal. "I don't know yet," she said. I need to think." "Okay," he said again. She looked at him. For the first time since he'd knocked on her door, something in her expression relaxed, just slightly, like a thread that had been pulled too tight and finally found a millimeter of slack. "You're very calm," she said. "One of us has to be." She almost laughed. "Not quite." "Is that a service you offer professionally?" "It's extra, emergency rate." This time she did laugh, just a little, quiet, surprised out of her. Upstairs, he washed his hands at the kitchen sink while she sat at the island with the folder open in front of her and a yellow legal pad she'd found in one of the unpacked boxes. She was making notes, fast and careful, her handwriting small and precise. He noticed she hadn't opened the laptop. "You don't want to go digital with this," he said. She glanced up. "No." "Smart." She went back to writing. He dried his hands and looked out the kitchen window at his truck in the driveway. He could just make out the shape of Maya in the back window, still curled against her seat. "Is that—" Vivian had looked up again. "Is there someone in your truck?" "My daughter. She's asleep." A beat. "How old?" 7. "Does she always go on jobs with you?" "At night, yeah. Her grandmother watches her during the day. Nights are just me." Vivian looked at the truck for a moment, then back at her notepad. Her pen moved. Then she stopped and said without looking up, "Have you eaten?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Tonight. Have you eaten?" He'd had half a sandwich at 2 in the afternoon. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." She put the pen down and stood up. I'm not sure what I have. I haven't been to the store." She opened the refrigerator. He could see from across the room that it was nearly empty. A block of cheese, some eggs, a takeout container, condiments. "I can make eggs." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She was already getting a pan out of the cabinet, moving with the slightly aggressive efficiency of someone who needed something to do with their hands. "Sit down, Mr. Hale." He sat down. She made scrambled eggs and toast. The eggs were a little overdone, and the toast was unevenly browned, and she put the plate in front of him without ceremony and went back to her notepad. He ate. They were good. "You've been in the house 3 weeks?" he said. 4. "I took the first place I could find that had a fence." She said it matter-of-factly. "I was in a hotel before this. For 2 months." "Where were you before the hotel?" A pause. "San Francisco." Another pause. "I moved the company headquarters there 8 years ago. I moved back here because it was easier to disappear here." "You wanted to disappear." "Someone made it very difficult for me to exist publicly for a while." She said it in the same tone she might have used to describe a delayed flight. "There were articles, things that were said about me. Some of it was true. Most of it was framed to look worse than it was." He didn't ask what things. She didn't offer. "The executives," he said. "The ones in the documents? They were part of it?" She looked up. "I think some of them were. I could never prove it." "And now?" She touched the corner of the folder with one finger. "And now I might be able to." He wrote her a handwritten invoice. He hadn't brought his tablet, and she paid him in cash from a small box in the kitchen drawer, which he noted and didn't comment on. When he started collecting his bag, she walked him to the door without being asked. At the door, she said, "I'm going to need some time to figure out what to do with this." "Sure. And I may need someone to help me with the basement wall, the patching." "I can do that." "But I don't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated," he said. "I feel like you have a hole in your basement wall and someone's going to need to fix it eventually." She held the door for a moment. I'd feel better knowing someone else knew that those documents exist, in case something happens." He looked at her. "You think something might happen?" "I think 3 people stand to lose everything if those documents see daylight," she said. "And I don't know how long I've had them without knowing it, which means I don't know how much time I have to decide what to do." He thought about this. I won't say anything to anyone. I know, she said, and then, with the slight awkwardness of someone not used to admitting things, that's why I said it to you. He walked back to the truck. The rain had dropped to a drizzle. Maya was still asleep, Benny the rabbit barely visible in the dim light. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine, looking at the house through the rain-blurred windshield. The lights were still on in the kitchen. He drove home. He replayed the conversation twice while he carried Maya inside, her head lolling against his shoulder, her sneakers leaving faint muddy prints on the hallway floor that he'd have to clean up in the morning. He got her into bed, pulled the blanket up, stood in the doorway for a moment listening to her breathe. His house was the mirror image of his neighbor's in the most literal sense. Same footprint, roughly. A 3-bedroom ranch that he'd bought 2 years ago because the price was right and the school district was good. But where 14 Callaway felt hollow from the outside, 12 Callaway felt lived in to the point of slightly overwhelming. Maya's artwork covered the refrigerator. There were shoes by the door. The coffee table had a ring from a mug he kept meaning to treat and hadn't. There was a photo on the hall wall of him and Maya and his mother at a lake 3 summers ago, all 3 of them squinting into the sun, his mother laughing at something just outside the frame. He made himself a cup of coffee. He knew he wouldn't sleep right away anyway, and sat at the kitchen table with his phone, pulling up the minimal public information that existed about Vivian Sterling. There was more than he'd expected. She'd founded a tech investment firm called Ardent Capital at 22 out of a single-room apartment in Chicago. By 28, she'd turned it into one of the fastest-growing institutional investment platforms in the country. The articles from 5 years ago were full of the usual stuff. Youngest this, first woman to that, profile photos of her in conference rooms or on stage, always the same controlled expression. Then the coverage changed. He found it without trying very hard. 14 months ago, a series of articles had appeared, starting in a financial trade publication and spreading outward. The framing was different in each, but the core claims were the same, that Vivian Sterling had engaged in a pattern of misleading investors about projected returns, that there were questions about her handling of a major fund's assets, that multiple senior sources within the company described a culture of opacity and intimidation. He read 3 of them. The articles were sourced mostly to unnamed insiders. They were carefully worded, specific enough to be damaging, vague enough to avoid direct legal liability. He had no way to know if any of it was true, and he was aware of that. But even reading without context, the whole thing had the particular smell of something that had been constructed. The timing of the articles, the uniformity of the framing, the way each new piece built on the credibility of the one before. He put the phone down. 3 men who stood to lose everything. He'd been in enough people's houses to know that the scariest thing wasn't usually the obvious thing. A burst pipe was just a pipe. A flooded basement was just water. The dangerous part was almost always what you found when you opened up the wall. 3 days passed. He drove past 14 Callaway twice a day, once in the morning taking Maya to school, once in the evening coming back. He didn't look in any obvious way, but he noticed things. The kitchen light was on at irregular hours. The driveway gate was closed. Once, a sedan he didn't recognize sat at the end of the drive for about 20 minutes, then left. On the 4th day, he got a text from an unknown number. The basement floor is drying. If you have time this week, I'd like to get the wall patched. VS. He saved the number. He texted back, Wednesday morning work? Yes. Wednesday, he left Maya at school at 7:30 and was at the door of 14 Callaway by 8. Vivian answered in the same kind of working clothes, dark pants, a plain long-sleeved shirt. She'd been awake for a while, he could tell. There was a coffee mug in her hand and the particular alertness of someone who had been up thinking and was running on the forward momentum of it. I've been going through the documents, she said before hello. Come in. He came in. The kitchen island was covered with papers, printed copies of things, more of her small handwriting notes, a timeline she'd constructed on a long strip of yellow legal paper taped to the cabinet door above the island. She'd been thorough. She'd also been very careful about what was on the island versus what was in the accordion folder, which was closed and clipped shut and sitting on the far end of the counter by itself. There's a 3rd account I didn't see the first night, she said. She moved a sheet aside and found the one she wanted, held it up. He couldn't read it from across the kitchen, but he could see it was dense with numbers. It's routed through a holding company in Delaware, standard shell structure. But the company name is a variation on a legitimate subsidiary that my CFO runs. The variation is subtle, one letter different. That's not a coincidence. No. She put the paper down, which means Marcus Teller knew. My CFO. Oh. She said the name like she was testing the weight of it. I've known Marcus for 7 years. He came with me from Chicago. That's harder than a stranger. Yes. She picked up her coffee. Yes, it is. He gave her a moment, then, you have the documents. Do you know yet what you're going to do with them? She turned to look at the timeline on the cabinet. I have to be very careful how I introduce them. If I go to the board directly, Marcus and the other two will know immediately, and they'll have time to move or destroy evidence on their end before I can get ahead of it. She traced the timeline with one finger. The board meeting is in 3 weeks. Annual review. If I can build the case before then, structure it so that everything is presented at once, all the evidence, all the account information, the full picture, they won't have time to respond before it's already in front of the board. And the original source? Whoever put those documents in the wall? She was quiet for a moment. I think I know who it was. Someone who worked in the company's internal audit function. She resigned about a year ago, very quietly. I thought maybe the pressure had gotten to her. She shook her head. I think she found this and didn't know what to do with it. She knew my house had been listed for sale, and she hid it where she hoped I'd find it. But you bought the house furnished. You never went into the basement. No. She looked at him. Until a pipe broke. The kitchen was quiet. That's a strange thing, he said. Yes, she said. It is. He patched the drywall that morning. It took 3 hours because the backing framing needed repair where the water had gotten into it, and he had to source the right thickness of panel, and she didn't have the kind of tools that lent themselves to this kind of work. So twice he drove back to his truck to get things he'd forgotten. She worked at the island while he worked in the basement. At some point, she brought a second mug of coffee down and set it on the shelf near where he was working without saying anything. He found it when he stood up, and it was exactly the right temperature. Which meant she'd timed it, which meant she'd been paying attention. He drank it standing in the half-finished basement, looking at the patched section of wall, and thought that this was probably the strangest week he'd had in a while. By noon, the patch was done. It would need 24 hours to dry before she could paint over it. He told her this, and she nodded, and he wrote up the second invoice. At the door, he said, "You should tell someone else about the documents, someone you trust." She looked up from the invoice. I don't have a lot of those. One person doesn't have to be someone in the company, just someone who knows the situation in case something happens to me before I can use them. In case you need backup, he said. She held the invoice. She looked at him in that careful way she had, like she was reading the fine print of something. I'll think about it, she said. He nodded, started down the porch steps. Grayson. He turned. She didn't call people by their first names easily. He'd noticed that. The few times she'd talked about colleagues or even the friend she'd mentioned once in passing, it was always last names. Thank you, she said. For Wednesday. And for the other night. The pipe needed fixing, he said. I know. A pause. But you stayed. He got in his truck and drove to his next job, which was a backed-up drain on the other side of town, and he didn't think about Vivian Sterling again until he was almost done with it, and the thought arrived without warning, that it had been a very long time since someone had made him eggs at 10 o'clock at night without being asked. He didn't examine the thought. He let it pass. But it didn't entirely go away. The next 10 days passed in a rhythm that neither of them had planned. Grayson found reasons to stop by, not manufactured ones, but legitimate ones that kept presenting themselves in the way that problems did with a house that had been sitting empty for months before someone moved in. The kitchen faucet had low pressure, which turned out to be a clogged aerator. One of the outdoor spigots had a slow drip that would become a real problem in winter. The basement sump pump, which should have kicked on automatically during the storm, had a float switch that was stuck in the off position, which was probably why the flooding had been worse than it needed to be. He didn't charge her for the small things. She noticed, and she objected, and they had a short argument about it in the driveway one morning that ended with her paying him anyway, rounding up, not down, and him not arguing further because she had that look that meant the conversation was over. The thing was, he would have stopped by regardless. He was aware of that. He didn't lie to himself about it, but he also didn't do much with the awareness, just carried it around like a stone in his pocket, noting its weight without doing anything particular about it. What he noticed during those 10 days was the way Vivian Sterling actually lived. Not the version of her that existed in financial articles or the careful, controlled impression she gave at first meeting, but the day-to-day reality of her, which was more complicated and more interesting and considerably more tired than any of that. She slept badly. He could tell because the kitchen light was on at 2 in the morning when he happened to be up with Maya, who'd had a nightmare and needed water and 5 minutes of company before she went back down. He didn't think much of it the first time, but it happened 3 nights in a row and then again the following week, and the pattern told him something. She ate irregularly. The few times he was there at mealtimes, he noticed she'd either forgotten or didn't care, and both possibilities said the same thing, that she was the kind of person who got so deep into a problem that the physical world dropped away. His mother was like that. His mother also got migraines and forgot to drink water and then was furious at herself for getting migraines, as if the body were a malfunctioning employee she was personally disappointed in. He started bringing coffee. Not every time, and not in any way that made it a thing. Just, if he was stopping by in the morning, he'd grab 2 cups from the place on Reardon Street that had the parking he needed for the truck, and he'd hand her one without making anything of it. She took it without making anything of it either. That was the part he appreciated. Maya met her on a Thursday. It wasn't planned. He'd had to bring Maya along on a morning job because his mother had a doctor's appointment, and the school drop-off didn't work with the timing. He'd been hoping the faucet repair at 14 Callaway would be quick, but the valve seat was corroded in a way that required more work than he'd estimated, and by the time he realized it was going to take a while, Maya had gotten bored waiting in the truck and had let herself in through the front gate, which he'd left open, and was standing on the porch. He heard the door open from inside the house. He came up the basement stairs fast, expecting to need to defuse something awkward, and found Vivian crouched down to Maya's height on the porch, the two of them in the middle of what appeared to be a serious conversation about the rabbit Maya was carrying. "His name's Benny," Maya was explaining. "But my dad says there were other Bennies before this one. I don't remember them." "That's probably okay," Vivian said. "If you love this Benny, he's the real one." Maya considered this with the gravity that 7-year-olds brought to genuine philosophical questions. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I think, too." She looked up and saw Grayson in the doorway. "Dad, her name is Vivian. She has a really big house and no toys." "I'm aware," Grayson said. "Come inside, Bug. Don't stand on the porch." Vivian stood up and caught his eye over Maya's head, and there was something in her expression that was unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before. Not soft, exactly. More like the brief disappearance of the careful management she applied to herself most of the time. Maya spent the next 40 minutes sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of apple juice that Vivian had found in the back of the refrigerator. It was technically for cooking, a small bottle, but Maya didn't know that. And drawing on the back of some old printed spreadsheets that Vivian had given her because she'd asked for paper. She drew a house, a rabbit, a dog. She'd been asking for a dog for 8 months, and Grayson's answer had not changed. And what she described as the ocean, but the big part, which looked like blue horizontal lines across the whole page. Vivian sat across from her and worked on her own papers, and the two of them existed in a comfortable silence that Grayson observed from the basement doorway while he waited for the replacement valve seat to set. Later, after he'd finished the repair, and Maya had been buckled back into the truck with her drawings and her juice, Vivian walked him to the gate. "She's a good kid," Vivian said. "She is." He adjusted the strap of his bag. "She's also 7 and has no filter, and will repeat anything she hears, so whatever you'd rather she didn't know, just don't say it around her." Vivian glanced at the truck. Maya was visible through the window, examining her drawings with the critical attention of an artist reviewing her own portfolio. "Does she know about her mother?" The question was direct enough that it stopped him for a second. "She knows she's not around," he said. "She's never asked more than that." "And when she does?" "I'll figure it out." Vivian nodded. She didn't push it. He appreciated that too. 11 days after the night of the burst pipe, Vivian found the second layer. She called him at 7 in the morning, which she'd never done before, and the particular quality of the silence on the line before she spoke told him something had shifted. "Are you available to come over?" she said. "Not for a repair. I need another set of eyes on something." He dropped Maya at school and was there by 8:15. She had the documents spread across the island again, but differently than before, grouped now in stacks with colored tabs she'd made from torn pieces of paper, a system that clearly made sense to her and was opaque to everyone else. She'd printed new things from somewhere and added them to the piles. The timeline on the cabinet had grown, with new entries in a different color pen extending it past where it had originally ended. "There's a fourth person," she said, before he'd set his bag down. "He came to the island." She pointed to a stack on the far left. "These are the original documents from the safe, the account records, the transfer authorizations. 3 names appear consistently: Marcus Teller, my CFO, Devin Cho, my head of institutional relations, and a man named Ira Bassett, who was brought in 18 months ago as an outside financial consultant." She moved her hand to the next stack. "These are records I pulled from our public filings over the last 24 hours. Things I should have been looking at more carefully but wasn't because I trusted the people managing them. And there's a series of consultant fees paid to a firm called Halcyon Advisory Group. 12 payments over 14 months, each one just under the threshold that would require additional board approval. Halcyon Advisory Group does not appear to have a website, a registered address, or any public presence whatsoever. It's a shell." "It's a shell," she agreed. "And the bank routing on the payments? I had to get creative to trace it, and I'm not sure everything I did was technically inside the lines of what I'm authorized to access, but the routing traces back to an account associated with a name I recognize." She slid a printed page toward him. "Oliver Vance." The name meant nothing to Grayson. He looked up at her. Oliver Vance was the majority stakeholder in a competing firm that spent 3 years trying to acquire Ardent Capital through legitimate means, she said. "I blocked the acquisition twice. The second time, I had my legal team file a regulatory complaint against his firm for some genuinely questionable practices during the negotiation. The complaint went nowhere, but it cost him, publicly, reputationally. He's been quiet since then." She looked at the page. "But not inactive, apparently." "He funded the people inside your company. I think he identified them, found the ones who were already dissatisfied or already doing small things they shouldn't, and gave them a structure and a direction." She looked at the timeline. "The first payments to Halcyon precede the first irregular transfers by about 6 weeks. That's enough time to set up the accounts, establish the pattern, build in deniability." Grayson stood back and looked at the whole spread of it. He wasn't a financial person. He ran a small business out of a truck and a storage unit in his own 2 hands, and the world these documents described, shell companies and routing numbers and consultant fees engineered to fall below approval thresholds, was not a world he moved in. But the logic of it wasn't complicated. It was just betrayal at a scale that cost more. "They were trying to take the company from you," he said. "Yes, and they nearly did." She sat down on the stool at the end of the island. For a moment, she didn't look like someone who'd founded a billion-dollar firm. She looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and was starting to feel the real weight of it now that she could see the whole shape. 14 months ago, when those articles appeared, when the stories started about the misleading investors, the opacity, the culture of intimidation, whatever that means, I couldn't understand where it was coming from. I thought maybe I'd missed something, made someone genuinely angry somehow. I spent weeks trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. But you hadn't done anything. I blocked a man who had a lot of money and a long memory from buying what he wanted. She looked at her hands. That's all, and that was enough. Grayson pulled out the second stool and sat down across from her. This wasn't a plumbing visit, and they both knew it. "What do you need right now?" he said. She looked up. "Specifically," he said, "today. What do you need to do?" She seemed surprised by the directness. She thought about it seriously. "I need to make copies of everything and store them somewhere that isn't this house. I need to verify the Halcyon routing one more time because I'm not 100% certain I followed the chain correctly. And I need to decide whether to bring in outside legal counsel before the board meeting or after." Before, he said. Definitely before. If I bring in outside counsel, Marcus will find out within 72 hours. He has a contact at every major firm in the city. It's how he's always worked. He built relationships laterally across the whole industry, and I used to think it was admirable. So, find a firm outside the city. She looked at him. That's obvious. I know it's obvious, but sometimes obvious is what you need when you've been staring at something too long. She was quiet for a moment, then reluctantly. Yes, you're right. I have a waterproof lockbox in my truck. It's for documents on water damage jobs, insurance stuff. You can use it for the copies until you figure out a better option. You're going to store evidence of corporate fraud in your work truck. I'm going to store documents in a lockbox. I don't know what they say. She almost smiled. You know what they say. I know the outline. He stood up. Do you have a printer? They spent the next 2 hours making copies. She printed, he organized, she rechecked the Halcyon routing trace with him sitting beside her, walking him through the logic, not because he could verify it, but because explaining it out loud helped her catch the one error she'd made in the second step of the chain. A transposition in a routing number that, when corrected, actually made the connection cleaner and more certain. That's better, she said when she'd corrected it. That's actually better. Sometimes you just need someone else in the room. I don't usually work with other people in the room. I know, he said. It shows. She looked at him sharply. He met her look without flinching, and after a second she exhaled and said, Yes, fine, it does. He put the copied documents in the lockbox. She kept the originals in the accordion folder with an additional copy of the USB drive she'd made, wrapped in a plastic bag, stored inside a box in her closet that was labeled with the name of a kitchen appliance she didn't have. He was at the door when she said, Devin Cho's assistant called me yesterday. Devin wants to set up a check-in call. He does this every few weeks. It's part of his normal pattern. He's head of institutional relations. He genuinely needs to brief me periodically. I've been avoiding it for the last month. You should take it. If I take it, I have to act like nothing is wrong. Yes. I don't know if I can do that convincingly. You did it with me, he said, the first night. You knew what was in that wall the moment you saw it, and you acted like you didn't for at least 5 minutes. She stiffened slightly. He wasn't wrong, and they both knew it. Take the call, he said. Be normal. Let him give you his update. Ask the questions you'd normally ask, and pay attention to what he doesn't say. She absorbed this. When did you become a strategist? I'm not a strategist. I've just dealt with a lot of situations where the other person knows something's wrong, but neither side wants to be the first one to say it. He pushed the door open. Take the call, Vivian. He left. That evening, he was sitting at the kitchen table going through invoices, the kind of end-of-day accounting he'd been doing for 6 years, adding up what he'd earned and what he'd spent and what the difference left him with, which was almost always less than it should have been, when his phone buzzed. I took the call. Devin was perfectly normal. Briefed me on 2 institutional accounts, asked about the board meeting prep, mentioned he was thinking of taking some vacation in October. A pause. Another text. He's good at it. The normal. That's the part that's hard to look at. Grayson set the invoice down. He typed, You did the right thing taking the call. A long pause, then, Grayson, what do you actually get out of this? He read the message twice. He put the phone down and picked up the invoice and stared at a number that didn't balance and thought about how to answer that. Finally, he picked the phone up again. A pipe I fixed, an aerator I cleaned, a sump pump that works now. That's what I got out of it. He watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. That's not what I meant. I know, he typed. Good night, Vivian. The dots appeared once more and then stopped. No reply came. He finished the invoices. He checked on Maya, who was asleep with Benny the rabbit and the drawing she'd made at Vivian's kitchen island, including the ocean but the big part, which she'd taped to her wall herself with a piece of Scotch tape that was going to take the paint off when he eventually pulled it down. He stood in her doorway for a while. He was doing a thing he did sometimes, adding up the pieces of his life the way he added up invoices, trying to see where things balanced and where they didn't. He had a daughter who was healthy and smart and occasionally exhausting. He had a business that paid its bills most months. He had a house that needed work, but was his. He had his mother, who showed up when he needed her, and sometimes when he didn't. He had 2 friends he'd had since before Maya was born, decent men who were busy with their own lives and called when they could. It was a life that had been built out of whatever had been left after everything else fell away. He went to bed. He didn't sleep well. He lay in the dark and thought about a woman across the street who ate irregularly and slept badly and had built something extraordinary and nearly had it taken from her by people she'd trusted, and who had asked him, with genuine uncertainty, not as a rhetorical device, what he actually got out of being in her orbit. He didn't have a clean answer for that, but when he closed his eyes, he was not thinking about the documents in the lockbox in his truck. He was thinking about the way she'd crouched down on the porch to talk to Maya, eye to eye, like it was the only natural thing to do. Like the most important conversation in the vicinity was the one happening at a 7-year-old's height, with a stuffed rabbit as a participant. It took him a long time to fall asleep. The lockbox sat in the back of the truck in the dark driveway, and across the street, through the hedges and the iron fence, the kitchen light at 14 Callaway was on until past midnight. The board meeting was 12 days away when things started to move faster than either of them had planned. It began with a small thing, the way most dangerous things did. Vivian texted him on a Tuesday morning. Not about the house, not about a repair, just a single line. Someone went through the basement while I was out yesterday. I can't prove it, but I know. He was on a job across town when the message came in. He read it twice, finished tightening the connection he was working on, and called her back. "What makes you think someone was in there?" he said. "The folder." Her voice was steady but had that controlled quality again, the one that meant she was working to keep it that way. "I had it on the left side of the shelf, spine facing out. I know exactly how I left it because I was specific about it. I have a habit of noting where I put things. It was facing in when I got home." "Could you have moved it and not remembered?" "No." He didn't argue with that. "Anything taken?" "Nothing obvious. The copies I made are still there. The original USB drive is where I left it." A pause. "But someone was looking, which means someone knows the documents exist. Or suspects. Either way." She stopped. "Grayson, if they know I have evidence, the board meeting timeline doesn't hold. They won't wait for the annual review. They'll move before I can." He thought about the lockbox in the back of his truck. The originals were still in her house. She'd felt more comfortable keeping them close, and he hadn't pushed it. That felt like a mistake now. "Get the originals out of there today," he said. "I'll come by tonight." "I can bring them to you." "Okay. After 7. Maya's at my mother's tonight." She came at 7:30, on foot, through the side gate between their properties that he'd fixed the latch on 3 weeks ago. She was wearing a dark jacket and carrying the accordion folder under one arm, like it was nothing. Like she did this every day, and the deliberateness of the casual act told him she was more rattled than she was showing. He let her in through the back door. She stood in his kitchen, which was the direct inverse of hers, small and overfull and smelling like the pasta he'd made for Maya the night before, and looked around with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He put the folder in the lockbox, clicked it shut, and put it in the hall closet under a box of winter coats and some of Maya's outgrown shoes. It was not a sophisticated hiding place. It was also the last place anyone would look. He made coffee. She didn't object. "Walk me through the timeline again," he said, sitting across from her. "The board meeting. What exactly happens there that you need?" She wrapped both hands around the mug. "The annual review is a formal session. Every senior officer presents. The outside board members are all present, and decisions made in that session carry full fiduciary weight. If I present the evidence in that setting, with the full board present, with everything documented and witnessed, Marcus and Devin and Bassett can't suppress it. They'd have to respond in real time, in front of people they can't control. And if they find out before then? They call an emergency session, bring their own narrative, frame it as internal mismanagement, erratic leadership, whatever story they've been building." She looked at her hands. "They've had 14 months to build it. The press coverage gave them the foundation. All they need is a moment of chaos, and they can walk into that boardroom first." "So you need the 12 days." "I need the 12 days." He drank his coffee. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car went past on Callaway Drive, and they both tracked the sound without meaning to. "The outside counsel," he said. "Did you find someone?" "I have a call tomorrow with a firm in Boston. Referral from someone I trust who has no connection to the company." She glanced at the hallway where the closet was. "I'm going to ask them about emergency injunctive relief as a parallel track. If I can't get through the board meeting before they move, I want a court filing ready." "That's smart." "It's also expensive and messy, and I'd rather not." She looked up at him. "But yes, it's the right call." He nodded. She finished her coffee. She should have left. The logical sequence of the evening was complete. But she didn't move, and he didn't stand up. And the kitchen sat around them with its ordinary clutter and its ticking clock and the faint sound of the street outside. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Your daughter's mother, you said she's never around. Did that happen all at once, or was it—" She stopped. "I'm sorry, that's personal." "It's okay." He considered how much of it to give her. She left when Maya was 18 months old. It wasn't dramatic. There was no blow-up, no single event. She just decided that the life she wanted and the one she had were too different, and she chose. She called once, about a year after she left. Told me she was in Portland. We haven't talked since. Vivian was quiet. "Maya doesn't know the whole of it," he said. "She knows her mother isn't here. She's asked a couple of times, and I've told her the truth in the version a 7-year-old can carry, which is that some people aren't able to be the parent their kid needs, and that has nothing to do with the kid." "Do you believe that? The part about it having nothing to do with Maya?" 100%. He said it without hesitation. "Maya's the best thing I've ever been a part of. Whatever her mother decided, that's about her mother." Vivian looked at the table. "I used to think that about myself," she said. "The people who left my company, the ones who went to the press, I kept trying to figure out what I'd done. I spent months on it. And eventually I realized it was a waste of time. Not because I'm perfect. I'm not. I know exactly where I've been difficult and cold and too demanding." She said it without apology, like a fact. "But the things they accused me of, those were lies. And I was so busy interrogating myself that I almost missed the fact that the lies were deliberate." "When did you stop?" She thought about it. "About 3 months ago. I stopped blaming myself for things I didn't do." A small pause. "It's harder than it sounds." "I know." She looked at him. The kitchen light was doing that thing it did in old houses. Slightly warm, slightly uneven, the kind of light that flattened the careful management out of people's faces and showed what was underneath. "You're very easy to talk to," she said. "That's not a compliment I give often. But how do you mean it?" "I mean that most people I talk to want something from me. They want access or money, or to be able to say they know me, or they want to fix me, which is a different kind of wanting. You just talk to me like I'm a person in a kitchen." "You are a person in a kitchen." "I know." She almost smiled. "It's just been a while since someone acted like that was enough." He held her gaze for a moment. He knew what was happening in the room. He wasn't obtuse. And he also knew that she was somewhere between vulnerable and exhausted, and in the middle of the most dangerous 2 weeks of her professional life. Those were not ideal conditions for whatever he might say next. He picked up his mug. "You should get some sleep tonight. You've got a call with Boston in the morning." She looked at him, and he could see her clock the deliberateness of the redirect, and something in her expression acknowledged it without being embarrassed by it. She stood up. "Yes," she said. "You're probably right." He walked her to the back door. She paused on the step with the night air coming in, cool and smelling like the end of autumn. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee and the closet. Keep your phone on tonight." "I always do." She crossed the yard through the side gate, and he watched until the light went on in her kitchen, and then he closed the back door and stood in his own kitchen for a while with the 2 empty mugs on the table. The next 4 days were the kind of tense that existed underneath normal life rather than breaking through it. Vivian took the Boston call and hired the firm. She had 2 more calls with Devin Cho that she described to Grayson in brief text afterward. Normal, nothing unusual, asked me about the October board prep again. and each one left her more unsettled than the last. Not because anything was wrong, but because nothing was. And the nothing being wrong had begun to feel like its own kind of signal. Grayson fixed a light fixture in her upstairs hallway that had been flickering since she moved in. It took 20 minutes. He stayed for an hour. He was aware that this was happening, the staying. He couldn't entirely explain it to himself in language that felt honest. He told himself it was the situation, that the job wasn't finished until she was through the board meeting and whatever came after. But that wasn't the whole truth, and he knew it. Maya noticed. Kids noticed things that adults thought they were hiding. Maya was sharper than average and had been watching Grayson for 7 years with the focused attention of someone whose entire world revolved around one person's emotional weather. On a Friday night, while he was making grilled cheese and she was sitting at the table with her homework, she said, without looking up from her worksheet, "Do you like Vivian?" Grayson turned the sandwich. "I like her fine. She's our neighbor. You go over there a lot. She's had some house problems. That's my job." Maya pressed her pencil into the worksheet with extra focus. "She made me apple juice." "She did. And she said Benny is the real Benny because I love him." She looked up. "I think she's smart." "She is smart. Is she your friend?" He thought about this in the specific way you had to think about questions from children, which was, what is this question actually asking, and what does the true answer do to this person? "Yeah," he said. "She's my friend." Maya returned to her worksheet. She had the expression of someone who had received useful information and was now processing it privately. He let her process. He put the sandwich on her plate, and she ate half of it and left the crust in the pattern she always left, 2 corners missing, middle intact, which drove him gently crazy. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Is she going to be okay?" He looked at her. She was looking at her plate. She wasn't asking about the house. "Yeah," he said. "She's going to be okay." He meant it. He just wasn't certain yet of how the math got there. Check. 8 days before this board meeting, Vivian called him at 11 at night. "I need you to come over," she said. "Now." He was at her door in 4 minutes. She let him in before he knocked. The kitchen island was in full evidence spread mode. The worst version of it he'd seen. Papers everywhere, 2 laptops open, a legal pad with writing so dense the lines had merged together. She was barefoot, and her hair was down, and she had the look of someone who'd been sitting in the same chair for 6 hours running on focus, and no food. "Sit," he said. "I don't need to—" "Vivian, sit." She sat. He found a box of crackers in the cabinet and put them in front of her. She ate 2 without looking at him, and then looked at the crackers like she was surprised they were there. "Talk," he said. "The Boston firm found something," she said. "In the Halcyon routing chain, there's a 5th account. Not a shell, a real account in the name of a real person." She slid a piece of paper across the island. He looked at it. A name he didn't recognize, an account number, a bank in the Cayman Islands. "I know this person. She's a deputy regulator in the financial oversight body that reviewed my company during the investigation 14 months ago." The kitchen got very still. "She was on the review panel," Vivian said. "She was one of 3 people who determined that the accusations had sufficient merit to continue investigation. The investigation that ran for 5 months and cost the company $11 million in legal fees and ate my stock price by 1/3. She stopped. "And she was being paid out of Halcyon." Grayson looked at the paper. "They bought the regulator. They paid someone inside the regulatory body to keep the investigation going long enough to do maximum damage. Long enough that major institutional investors started moving money out of the fund. Long enough that I had to settle 2 breach of fiduciary lawsuits just to stabilize things." She pressed her palm flat on the island. "This isn't just corporate fraud, Grayson. This is regulatory corruption. The Boston firm says this is federal territory, which changes everything about how you use it." "Yes." She looked at the paper. "If I walk into the board meeting with this and nothing else changes, I fix my company. I get Marcus and Devin and Bassett removed. I recover the missing funds. I rebuild. But Vance walks away. The regulator walks away. The whole structure that was built to destroy me, the press campaign, the investigation, all of it, none of that gets answered. But if you bring in federal investigators, Then I lose control of the timeline. I lose control of the narrative. The investigation could take years. The company gets destabilized by the scrutiny, even if I'm cleared. Investors panic. She looked up at him. And the board meeting is in 8 days. Grayson thought about it. He was careful not to speak too fast, which was a habit he'd built over years of telling people things they didn't want to hear about their houses. The line between the problem and the solution was almost never as clean as people wanted. "Can you do both?" he said. She looked at him. "Can you use the board meeting to secure your company, get the votes, get the officers removed, stabilize the structure, and then hand everything over to the federal people after, from a position of strength rather than chaos?" She was quiet for a long time. She picked up a cracker without noticing and ate it. "The Boston firm would advise against it," she said. "They'd say I should notify the federal authorities immediately and let them direct the strategy. What do you say?" "I say that I built this company from one room in Chicago, and I have spent 14 months being told I'm not fit to run it, and I would very much like to be the one who decides what happens to it next." She said it quietly, without heat, which made it land heavier. "Does that make me someone who's putting her ego above the right thing?" "No," he said. "It makes you someone who wants to fix her own house." He meant it plainly. "There's nothing wrong with that, as long as the fixing is real." She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the wind had picked up. He could hear it in the oak trees along the curb, the same trees that had bent sideways in the storm the night they met. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." She held his gaze. "Are you trying really hard not to say something right now, or am I reading that wrong?" He wasn't expecting the question. He wasn't expecting the directness of it, or the way she'd asked it. Not coy, not performing, just looking at him straight on with the kind of honesty that cost something. He held her gaze. The room sat between them. "I've been careful," he said, choosing each word, "about what I say to you. Because you're in the middle of something serious and complicated, and because what I might say thought, the timing of it, felt wrong. Not the thing itself, the timing." She absorbed this. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something in it settled, like a question that had been hanging had found a surface to rest on. "I appreciate the care," she said. "But for the record," she paused, "I'm not made of glass." "I know you're not." "Then don't be careful on my account." He looked at her. The kitchen light, the papers everywhere, the half-empty box of crackers between them. 8 days before everything in her life either broke open or held. He was about to speak when they both heard it. A sharp electronic chirp from the security panel near the back hallway. Then another. Then a third. And the panel lit up red. "Motion detected. Rear perimeter. Zone 3. They both went still. Vivian was already moving. She reached the security panel in 4 steps, pulled up the camera feed on the mounted screen. The backyard. 2 men moving along the rear fence line, not rushing, not hiding exactly, just moving with the purposeful quiet of people who had done this before. Grayson was behind her. He looked at the screen. "Side gate," he said. "Is it locked?" "I locked it an hour ago." "Back door?" "Deadbolt." He looked at the 2 shapes on the screen. They had stopped at the rear fence, one crouching, one standing, and the standing one was on a phone. "They're not breaking in," he said. "They're looking." "They're here because of the documents," she said. "Grayson, if they know I'm this close, call the Boston firm, right now." "Emergency line?" "They gave you one. It's after 11. Call them." She picked up her phone. He watched the security feed. The 2 men held their position at the rear fence. The crouching one now appeared to be examining the fence line itself, looking for a way in, taking their time, not yet committing. Not yet. Grayson looked at the accordion folder on the counter. He looked at the 2 laptops open on the island. "While you're on the phone," he said quietly, "we need to talk about what the next 8 days actually look like. Because I don't think they're going to wait for the board meeting." Vivian looked at the security feed, then at him. She dialed. The Boston attorney's name was Claire Oduya, and she picked up on the second ring. Grayson listened to Vivian's side of the call from across the kitchen, watching the security feed while she talked. The two men at the rear fence stayed there for another 6 minutes, long enough that he memorized the shape of them, the way they moved, the fact that one was significantly taller than the other and kept his hands in his jacket pockets while the shorter one did most of the examining. Then they left the way they'd come, back along the fence line and out of frame, and the yard went still and empty again under the motion sensor lights. Vivian was still on with Oduya when they left. He watched the empty yard for another 3 minutes to be sure, and then he went to the front window and looked out at the street. Nothing obvious. A neighbor's porch light 2 houses down. The oak trees moving in the wind. His own truck parked in his driveway across the way. She came off the phone 20 minutes later. "She wants us to move the timeline up," she said. She was standing at the island, one hand pressed flat on the papers, and he recognized the posture. It was how she stood when she was absorbing something she didn't want to absorb. She's been in contact with a federal financial crimes unit through a colleague. They already have an open inquiry into Oliver Vance. Apparently he's been on their radar for 2 years for something unrelated. The Halcyon connection and the regulatory corruption would be significant additions to what they already have. So they want the documents. They want everything. The originals, the USB, the routing trace, all of it. She looked up. Oduya says if I hand this over to the federal unit before the board meeting, they can move on Vance and the regulator simultaneously, and the board presentation becomes less critical because the legal mechanism is already in motion. But you lose control. Yes. She said it simply. I hand it over and then it belongs to them. The company becomes part of an active federal investigation. The stock price reacts. The institutional clients start calling. And I stand in front of the board explaining why federal investigators are in my building. What did you tell Oduya? I told her I needed until morning. She pushed off the island. She wasn't happy about that, but she agreed. Grayson looked at the security feed, which showed nothing now but the empty yard and the slow movement of a branch near the fence. Those men tonight, he said. What's your read on them? Hired, not law enforcement. They would have knocked or watched from a car, not come to the fence line. Someone sent them to assess what I have and whether I'm close to using it. She folded her arms. Which means Marcus or Devin has figured out that I'm not just sitting on the documents. They know I'm building something. Devin's check-in calls. She nodded slowly. He was taking readings. The questions he asked, about board meeting prep, about October planning. He was testing whether I was operating normally or whether something had changed. She closed her eyes briefly. I thought I was performing normal well enough. Apparently not well enough. Or someone in the Boston firm talked. She opened her eyes. I thought of that. Oduya's firm is clean. She has a reputation she spent 30 years building and she wouldn't risk it. But someone on her staff could have said something casually, to the wrong person. She shook her head. It doesn't matter how the leak happened. What matters is they know I'm close. So the question is whether you go to the board in 8 days or let the federal people move now. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. She was watching him in the way she had. That careful reading she did, measuring the distance between what someone was thinking and what they were saying. Tell me what you actually want, he said. She looked at him. I want to walk into that boardroom myself. I want to stand up in front of the people who watched those articles run and let the investigation drag and quietly move their support away from me. I want to stand in front of them and put every piece of evidence on the table and watch Marcus and Devin sit there and have nowhere to go. She stopped. That's what I want. Then you have to compress the timeline. It's 8 days. It was 8 days. Now it's different. He moved to the island and looked at the spread of papers. The board meeting isn't for 8 days, but you can call an emergency session. She went still. You're the majority stakeholder, he said. You have the right to call an emergency board session with 72 hours notice. You've mentioned that. That puts you at this weekend, before they have time to organize a response, before they know which way you're moving. She stared at the papers. He could see her running it through. If I call an emergency session without a complete package, I look reactive, she said. I need the evidence to be airtight. The routing trace needs one more verification on the Cayman account. How long does that take? Oduya's team was already working on it, maybe 24 hours. Then you have 24 hours to get the verification, and then you call the session. He looked at her. And you tell Oduya about the federal track at the same time. You hand the evidence to both simultaneously. The board session and the federal inquiry run parallel. You don't choose one over the other. She absorbed this. That's aggressive. They sent 2 men to your fence line at 11 at night. Yes. She exhaled. Yes, they did. And the documents are in a lockbox in a hall closet across the street. She almost smiled. In a box of winter coats. It's a reasonable system. It's a terrible system. But she was already pulling the legal pad toward her. If I call the emergency session for Saturday morning, that's 68 hours from now. I'd need to notify board members tonight, which means I'm calling people at midnight. Is that a problem? Half of them will be annoyed. Are they the half you need? She looked at the board member list she'd written on the second page of the legal pad. He could see names with check marks and question marks beside them. She counted something quietly. I have 6 certain votes, she said. I need 8 for a majority. 2 of the question marks, Elaine Corwood and David Fenwick. I think they're persuadable if the evidence is presented correctly. They're not aligned with Marcus. They're just cautious people who don't like disruption. Then call Corwood and Fenwick first, before you send the formal notice. She looked up. Not to lobby them, he said, just to tell them personally before they get the formal notice, so they don't feel blindsided. Cautious people respond better when they feel respected. She held his gaze. You know, for someone who fixes pipes, I've been dealing with people in stressful situations for 6 years. Some of it rubs off. She picked up her phone. She looked at the time, 11:42. She set the phone down, picked up the legal pad, set that down too. Then she picked the phone back up and dialed. He got up and went to the kitchen, found her a glass and filled it with water, set it on the island beside her notepad. She was already talking when he did it, her voice switching registers into the composed, deliberate tone she used for professional calls, the one that was smooth and precise and gave nothing away that she hadn't intended to give. He listened to her work. He couldn't hear the other side of the call, but he could track the conversation from her end, the measured explanation, the brief pause while she listened, the one moment where her jaw tightened and then released as something was said that she hadn't expected. She made notes while she talked, 3 lines of her small handwriting, and by the time she said goodbye, her voice had the specific quality of someone who'd been told something useful. Corwood already knows something is off, she said, after she'd set the phone down. She didn't say it directly, but she told me she'd been waiting for clarity, which means Marcus or Devin has been talking to her, feeling out her position. Is she with you? I think so. She asked one question. She wanted to know if what I was bringing was provable or circumstantial. I told her it was documented, verified, and corroborated by outside legal counsel. She said she'd be there Saturday. Fenwick. She dialed. The Fenwick call was shorter and went differently. He could tell by the way her shoulders set and didn't release for the whole conversation. When she hung up, she was quiet for a moment. He's not sure, she said. He was polite about it, but he's not sure. He mentioned Marcus by name twice, which means Marcus has already spoken to him. She looked at the legal pad. He said he'd need to review the evidence himself before the session. He wants a private call with Oduya tomorrow. Can Oduya do a call tomorrow morning? I'll make sure she can. She wrote it down. Fenwick isn't against me. He's just been given a different story, and he's trying to figure out which version is true. She tapped the pen against the pad. Which is actually fair. He doesn't know me the way Corwood does. Then give him what he needs to decide. She looked up at him. The kitchen was very quiet around them. The security panel had gone back to its normal green, the backyard still and empty on the small screen. The papers on the island, the list of names, the timeline on the cabinet that had grown and been revised over weeks until it covered 3 feet of space and 2 colors of pen. I'm going to win this, she said. Not as a declaration, more like a statement of fact that she was testing for the first time at full volume. Yes, he said. She looked at the papers. The company will be bruised. Some clients will leave regardless. Disruption scares money, and I can't control that. The press coverage will be bad for a while before it's good. She was cataloging it honestly, without pretending. It won't be clean. No. But I'll have the company, and the truth will be on record. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, then, Grayson. Yeah. After this is over, after Saturday, after whatever the week after Saturday looks like, She stopped, and he could see her choosing her words with the same care he'd been choosing his. I don't want to go back to just being the neighbor with the broken pipe. He held her gaze. The kitchen light sat between them, steady and warm and slightly uneven, same as always. You were never just the neighbor with the broken pipe, he said. Something in her face shifted. Not quite relief. Not quite anything he had a clean word for. It was the look of someone who had been braced for a door to stay shut and felt it move. She started to say something. He wasn't sure what. He never found out, because at that moment his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, his mother's number. He picked it up. Mom, I'm sorry to call late. His mother's voice, low and careful the way it got when she was trying not to alarm him. Maya's fine. She woke up with a stomachache. She's asking for you. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. He looked at Vivian. Go, she said immediately. Of course. Go. Call Oduya tonight, not tomorrow morning. Set up the Fenwick call for 7 a.m. I will. And lock the back gate. The one facing the side yard. The latch is... I know the latch, Grayson. I've lived here for 2 months. A beat. Go be with your daughter. He grabbed his jacket off the chair. At the back door he paused, turned around. She was already back at the island, phone in hand, legal pad in front of her, starting the next call. Her hair was still down and she was barefoot and surrounded by the full spread of everything she'd built and nearly lost and was now fighting to keep. And she looked completely like herself. Not like the composed photograph version, not like the controlled professional register. Just exactly like herself, which was a more complicated and more interesting thing. Vivian, she looked up. Saturday, he said. You'll have what you need. She held his gaze. I know. He left. The next 36 hours had the quality of something coiled. He went to his mother's house, sat with Maya on the bathroom floor for 40 minutes, while the stomachache resolved itself the way childhood stomachaches did, slowly and then all at once, and then carried her to the guest bed and stayed until she was asleep. He drove home at 2 a.m. and found 2 texts from Vivian waiting for him. Oduya is arranging the Fenwick call. Federal contact confirmed. They want originals as soon as possible after the board session. We give them nothing before. And then, 20 minutes later, the Cayman verification came back. It's clean. The evidence package is complete. He texted back, then you're ready. The response came after a pause long enough that he thought she'd gone to sleep. Ask me again Saturday morning. He almost wrote something else. He stopped himself and went to bed. Thursday passed in the specific grind of ordinary work. A water heater replacement in the morning, a clogged main line in the afternoon, an estimate for a bathroom remodel that he knew going in the customer couldn't afford, but didn't want to say so yet. He thought about Vivian at odd intervals, not with anxiety exactly, more the way you thought about a structure you'd assessed and believed was sound, but you checked anyway because the stakes were high enough to warrant it. She sent one text Thursday evening, Fenwick is in. Nothing else. He sent back good. Friday she sent nothing, which he read as a sign that she was deep in preparation and didn't need the interruption, which he respected. Friday night his phone rang at 10:15. Unknown number. He answered it because he'd been answering unknown numbers since the night of the storm. The voice on the other end was male, smooth, with the particular cadence of someone who had spent years in rooms where language was a tool. Mr. Hale, my name isn't important. I represent people who have a professional interest in Ms. Sterling's situation. I understand you've been spending time at the property on Callaway Drive. Grayson said nothing. There are documents, the voice continued, documents that, in the wrong hands, could cause significant disruption to people who have worked very hard to build legitimate businesses. We're simply asking that those documents be returned to their rightful custodians before... You should stop talking, Grayson said. A pause. Mr. Hale, I don't know what you think you know about me, but let me be clear. I don't have any documents. I'm a plumber, and this call is going to end now. He paused. Don't call this number again. He hung up. He sat in his kitchen for a moment. Then he texted Vivian. They called me. Unknown number, male, smooth, tried to discuss the documents. I said nothing useful. 3 minutes passed. Then, are you all right? He looked at the question for a second. Yes. You? They're scared. That's good. A pause. That's actually good, Grayson. Scared people make mistakes. He thought about the two men at the rear fence, about a smooth voice on an unknown number calling a plumber at 10:15 on a Friday night, about three people inside a company who had spent 14 months carefully dismantling someone's reputation and were now watching that someone quietly, methodically put the pieces back together. She was right. Scared people made mistakes, but scared people also move fast. Tomorrow morning, he typed. Call me when you're leaving for the board session. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. Call me. A long pause. Longer than the others. Okay, she wrote. I will. He put the phone down and checked on Maya, who was sleeping deeply and peacefully with Benny the rabbit and the drawing of the ocean but the big part still taped to her wall. He stood in her doorway and let the ordinary quiet of the house settle around him. Tomorrow Vivian would walk into a room full of people who had been told she wasn't fit to lead, and she would stand up and show them exactly what had been done and who had done it, and whatever happened after that would not be clean or simple or fast. But it would be true. He turned off the hall light and went to bed, and for the first time in 2 weeks he fell asleep quickly, without lying in the dark adding things up. She called him at 7:43 Saturday morning. He was already up, had been since 6, standing at the kitchen counter with coffee he'd made too strong because his hands had done it on autopilot while his head was somewhere else. Maya was still asleep. The house was quiet in the particular way it got on weekend mornings, that specific stillness that he usually liked, and today barely registered. I'm leaving in 15 minutes, Vivian said. Her voice was the composed register, the professional one, but underneath it he could hear something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite calm. The specific frequency of someone standing at the edge of something large and irreversible. How are you? He said. A pause. I've been better. I've also been considerably worse. A short breath. The package is complete. Oduya will be in the room. We have 8 confirmed votes. Fenwick held? Fenwick held. He called me at 6 this morning, actually. Wanted to tell me personally before the session. Something shifted in her voice. He said he owed me that much, given that he'd been leaning the wrong way for 6 months. That's a decent thing to do. Yes, it is. She was quiet for a moment. Marcus is going to be in that room. Devon, Bassett. I don't know what they know about what I have, but they know something is coming. They've known since the men at the fence. They're going to try to control the room before you can present, he said. Marcus especially. He'll try to introduce something that shifts the agenda. Oduya is managing the parliamentary procedure. She knows every rule in that charter better than the people who wrote it. A pause. She stopped. What? I just needed to hear a voice that wasn't about strategy for 10 seconds. He leaned against the counter. Outside the kitchen window, the morning light was coming in at the low autumn angle that made everything look slightly gold and slightly cold at the same time. His truck in the driveway, the oak trees along the curb, the iron fence at 14 Callaway visible through the gap in the hedge. Maya drew another picture of your house last night, he said. A beat of silence, then a small sound that was almost a laugh. Did she? She added a dog this time, standing by your front gate. I think it's meant to be a general suggestion. I'll take it under advisement. The almost laugh again, and underneath it something that sounded like it cost her something. The brief crack in the professional register, the realness underneath. Grayson. Yeah, thank you for all of it. The pipe, and the wall, and the closet, and every coffee, and every time you stayed when you didn't have to. She said it quickly, the way people said true things when they were afraid of the weight of them. I'll call you when it's done. I'll be here. She hung up. He stood at the window for a while. He thought about what it cost a person to walk into a room full of people who had been told to doubt them, carrying the truth and hoping it was enough. He thought about the 14 months she'd spent questioning herself, going back through her own decisions, her own character, looking for what she'd done wrong, when the answer had nothing to do with what she'd done and everything to do with what had been done to her. He thought about how long it took some people to understand that being broken down didn't mean you'd been wrong. He refilled his coffee. and waited. The call came at 12:38. He was in the backyard with Maya, who had decided after breakfast that the oak tree near the fence needed a swing and had spent 2 hours making a sustained, detailed, and ultimately persuasive legal argument for why this was a reasonable home improvement project. He was in the middle of explaining the structural limits of the branch she'd selected when his phone rang. He looked at the screen, stepped away from Maya, who immediately began examining the branch herself with the focused intensity of someone who intended to resume negotiations. Vivian. It's done. Her voice was different, not relief exactly. Relief was too simple a word for the thing he heard. It was more like the specific sound of something that had been held under enormous pressure for a very long time being allowed to release. Controlled still, but different. Something had come down. All three of them are out. Unanimous removal. Even the votes I wasn't sure of came through at the end. When the evidence was on the table, it wasn't close. He sat down on the back step. Marcus. He tried. In the first 10 minutes before Oduya could establish the formal session, he attempted to introduce a resolution about leadership review. His own motion, already written, already distributed to 2 board members beforehand. She stopped. But Oduya was faster. She had the session called to order before his paperwork hit the table. And once we were in formal session, he couldn't redirect without a second, and he didn't have one. Devin? Devin said almost nothing. He looked at the evidence, and then he looked at his hands, and he didn't look up again. Her voice was flat on this, factual, but he heard the cost of it underneath. 7 years of professional trust, gone in 40 minutes. Bassett tried to dispute the routing trace. Oduya dismantled him in about 4 minutes. She's very good. She is. The federal referral is filed. Oduya submitted it simultaneously, but the board authorized it in the same session. Everything goes to the Financial Crimes Unit on Monday morning, the originals. A pause. Including the documents from your closet. I'll get them to you today. I know. A longer pause. Grayson. The board asked me to address the company publicly, a formal statement, press availability, the full thing, on Monday. She sounded steadier now, but differently steady than her usual composed control. Not the managed kind, the real kind. I've been telling myself for 14 months that I was done with the public version of all this, that I wanted to be invisible. And now I think that was about fear, not preference. She was quiet for a moment. I think there's a difference, and I lost track of it. There is a difference. I know. Another pause. I'm going to make the statement, and I'm going to be honest in it, about what happened, about the investigation, about the 14 months. I'm not going to be careful. I've been careful long enough. He thought about her on his kitchen floor the night with the crackers and the security feed and the 2 men at the fence. He thought about the version of her that had existed before all of that, composed in conference room photographs, guarded in the few interviews he'd found, always the same controlled expression. He didn't know that version. He'd only ever known this one. Good, he said. She exhaled, a real one, not the kind she used to manage her breathing on difficult calls. I need to go. I have 3 hours of calls with institutional clients before I can leave the building. A short pause. But I wanted to call you first. Go, he said. Call me when you're out. I will. He sat on the back step for a moment after she hung up. Maya appeared in front of him, hands on her hips, face arranged in the expression she used when she felt a decision was being unnecessarily delayed. Dad, she said, the branch is fine. I checked it. He looked up at her. 7 years old, barefoot in the backyard, fully committed to her own conclusions. His whole life, standing in front of him in a grass-stained shirt. Yeah, he said. Let's go to the hardware store. The weeks after the board session moved the way aftermath always did. Not cleanly, not in a straight line, but in the messy, uneven way that real things resolved. There were days when it seemed like it was settling and days when something new complicated it, and the whole of it required a tolerance for uncertainty that Vivian had in larger reserves than she'd given herself credit for. The press coverage broke on Monday, after her statement. It was significant. The story of a corporate founder who had survived an internally orchestrated conspiracy involving regulatory corruption and a coordinated media campaign. That was not a quiet story. It ran in the financial press first, then moved to general outlets. And by Tuesday morning, her name was attached to the kind of coverage that was entirely different in character from what had run 14 months ago. The word that kept appearing was vindicated, which she told Grayson she found both accurate and insufficient. Vindicated implies I needed permission to be right, she said. They were in her kitchen, properly stocked now, a real grocery run having happened sometime in the weeks after the board session, and she was making actual food, not the emergency crackers and eggs version, but a real dinner because Maya was coming over and had submitted a formal request for spaghetti. I didn't need permission, I just needed evidence. Those are pretty much the same thing in a courtroom, he said. We're not in a courtroom. The court of public opinion is the worst court, she said. Lowest standards of evidence, no appeals process, terrible judges. She stirred the sauce with more force than it required. I'm not looking for vindication. I just want the record to be correct. The record is correct. Parts of it. She turned down the heat. The federal investigation will take time. Vance hasn't been charged yet. The regulatory angle may take longer than the corporate fraud angle because regulatory bodies move at the speed of, they just move very slowly. You knew that going in. Knowing something and living inside it are different. She looked at the stove. But yes, I knew. He set the table. She watched him do it with an expression he'd gotten familiar with over the weeks. A slightly bemused quality, like she was still occasionally surprised to find this particular person in her kitchen, setting her table, moving through her space with the ease of someone who'd been there long enough that it wasn't a performance anymore. The truth was, neither of them had made any large declarations. Things had moved the way things moved between people who were paying attention. Slowly, honestly, with the specific awkwardness of two people who had each spent years being very good at being alone and were now figuring out what the alternative looked like in practice. It didn't look perfect. It looked like dinner, and Maya asking too many questions, and Vivian answering them with the same direct seriousness she brought to everything, which Maya responded to with the complete loyalty that children gave to adults who treated them like their questions mattered. It looked like a Saturday morning when he found 2 coffee cups on his kitchen counter that he hadn't put there because she'd let herself in through the back while he was in the shower to get something she'd left, and had made coffee while she waited, and then left one for him without thinking too much about it. It looked like the conversation they'd finally had. Not on a dramatic night, not with the backdrop of security alarms or of evidence packages, but on an ordinary Tuesday evening sitting on his back step while Maya was inside watching something with too many cartoon sound effects. A conversation that was honest and incomplete and covered things that didn't resolve cleanly, because neither of them had a clean past to offer the other, and both of them knew that clean pasts weren't the point anyway. I'm not easy, she said during that conversation, stating it as a fact, not an apology. I know that. I work too much. I get absorbed in problems and the rest of the world falls away. I've been told I'm cold. She looked at the yard. I'm not cold. I don't give things away easily. I know that too. And you, she looked at him. You're carrying a lot. Maya, the business, your mother. You've built a life that's very full and very self-contained, and you're not used to letting it be anything other than what it already is. He thought about this. That's fair. I'm not saying it as a criticism. I know you're not. She looked at the yard again. I'm saying it because I think we both have habits that work fine in isolation and get complicated in combination. Most things worth having are complicated in combination. She turned to look at him. The backyard light was on. The motion sensor he'd adjusted 2 weeks ago so it didn't trip for every passing cat. And in it, she looked tired and real and like exactly herself, which was the version of her he'd come to prefer above all the others. Yes, she said. They are. He reached over and took her hand. No preamble, no setup, just that. She looked down at their hands and then up at him, and she didn't say anything, which was fine, because neither did he, and it was enough. Marcus Teller was formally charged 11 weeks after the board session. Devin Cho, in a move that surprised almost everyone including Vivian, reached a cooperation agreement with the federal unit and provided testimony against Vance and the deputy regulator in exchange for reduced charges. Ira Bassett hired the most expensive attorney available, and settled before trial in a deal that required full restitution and a permanent bar from serving as a financial consultant. Oliver Vance was indicted on 4 counts, including financial fraud and regulatory corruption. His attorneys contested everything, which meant the case would take years, which was exactly the kind of long, slow grinding process that Vivian had prepared herself for, with a realism that Grayson respected. "He'll fight it until he runs out of money," she said, on the evening the indictment was announced. "And he has a lot of money." "Does it matter? For the company?" "No, the company is clear. The regulatory record is corrected. That took some doing, but the oversight body moved faster than I expected, maybe because they were embarrassed." She sat down on the couch, his living room, Maya asleep down the hall. "For the company, it's over. For the federal case, it's years." "Can you live with that?" She considered it honestly. "Yes, I don't love it, but I can live with it." He handed her a glass of water. She took it and looked at the middle distance for a moment, and he let her look. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yeah." "When all of this started, when the articles ran and the investigation opened and I started losing clients and people I'd worked with for years stopped returning my calls," she stopped. "I spent so much time trying to hold everything together from the outside. The company, the legal response, the PR strategy, all of it. And inside I was disappearing. I was becoming the story they were telling about me instead of the person I actually was." "I know." "You didn't know me then?" "No, but I can see the shape of it." She looked at him. "The hotel, the 2 months before I found the house. I barely left the room. I ordered food once a day, worked 20 hours, slept 4. I told myself I was strategizing. I was hiding." She said it plainly, without drama. "I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it either. It was what I could manage." "That's not weakness. That's a person surviving a hard thing the best way they could." "I know that now. I didn't know it then." She was quiet for a moment. "Finding the house, finding the fence specifically, the big one, I told myself I needed privacy. And I did. But I also just needed to stop being visible for a while, to be somewhere that wasn't the story. And then the pipe broke." She looked at him, and something crossed her face that was complicated and real and had no clean name. "And then the pipe broke," she said. "And the man across the street showed up with a toolbox and a sleeping daughter, and he fixed the pipe and he stayed." "The pipe needed fixing." "Grayson." "Yeah. I'm being sincere." "I know." He looked at her. "I stayed because I wanted to, that's all." She set the water glass down on the coffee table, on the ring he'd never treated, the one he kept meaning to get to. And she leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let her, and they sat in the quiet living room while the cartoon sounds from Maya's room had long since stopped and the house settled into its nighttime sounds around them. It wasn't a perfect moment. His shoulder was a little sore from a difficult job that afternoon, and he'd been meaning to mention it. She'd gotten a work call 3 times in the last hour and answered 2 of them because she couldn't help it, which was the thing she did, the real version of her that he'd signed up for. Maya had left her shoes in the middle of the hallway again, and someone was going to trip on them in the dark. It was a real moment, which was better. The repaired section of the basement wall had been painted over by mid-November. Vivian had done it herself on a Saturday morning, which he hadn't expected. He'd offered to do it, or to hire someone, and she'd said no, she wanted to do it. He hadn't pushed. He came down the basement stairs while she was finishing the second coat. She was in old clothes, a brush in one hand, standing back and looking at the wall with the critical eye of someone who was checking a job. "How's it look?" he said. "Good. You can't tell where the original wall ends and the patch begins." She tilted her head. "It's a little lighter than the rest of the wall. It'll even out when it dries." He stood beside her and looked at it. The wall where the safe had been was smooth now, uniform, just a wall. The safe itself had gone to Oduya's firm as part of the evidence chain. The accordion folder was with federal investigators. The USB drive was a matter of legal record. The only evidence that any of it had happened was the patch, a slightly lighter rectangle of new drywall and paint, maybe 2 feet wide, that would probably always be slightly different from the surrounding wall in some way only a professional would notice. He noticed it. She probably would for a long time. Strange thing to stand here and look at, she said. Yeah. If the pipe hadn't broken, it was always going to break, he said. The fitting was original to the house. It was on borrowed time. She looked at the wall. Do you believe things happen for reasons? He thought about it seriously, because she'd asked it seriously. I believe things happen, and then I believe people make reasons out of them after. Whether the reasons were there before the things, I don't know. I used to not believe in anything like that, she said. I thought that was rigorous. That looking for patterns and meanings was just the brain refusing to accept randomness. And now? She looked at the wall for a long moment. Now I think randomness and meaning aren't opposites. A pipe breaks because a fitting wore out. That's random. A man shows up because that's his job. That's cause and effect. And then everything that comes after, that's choices. People choosing things. She paused. The meaning isn't in the event. It's in what you do with it. He looked at her. She was still looking at the wall, and the morning light came through the basement window at an angle that caught the side of her face, and she looked like someone who had come a long way and was standing in the specific place where all the roads behind her finally made sense as a route. That's a reasonable way to look at it, he said. She turned to face him. She had a small streak of paint on her left forearm, just below the elbow, which she hadn't noticed. He didn't mention it yet. I have a question, she said. Okay. The night I asked if you were trying really hard not to kiss me, she said it the way she said things she'd been holding for a while, straight out, no setup. And the alarms went off before you could answer. I remember. You never actually answered. He looked at her. The basement was quiet around them, the repaired wall behind her, the morning light coming through. All the weeks between that night and this one, the documents and the fence line and the federal referral and the late night calls and the dinner with Maya and the Tuesday evening on the back step and the hand he'd taken without preamble, all of it sitting in the space between where they'd been and where they were. Yes, he said, I was. She looked at him for a moment. Then she put the paintbrush down on the drop cloth with the specific deliberateness of someone setting something aside they no longer need. She stepped toward him, and he didn't move back, and she put her hand against the front of his jacket and looked up at him from close enough that he could see the paint streak on her forearm and the tiredness that lived behind her eyes, even on good days, and the real version of her that existed underneath all the managed versions. No alarms this time, she said. No, he said. No alarms. He kissed her. She kissed him back with none of the performance of a first kiss. No hesitation, no self-consciousness. Just the directness that was her actual nature, honest and unguarded, and it lasted long enough that the morning light moved slightly on the basement wall before they stepped back. She looked at him. He looked at her. Your forearm, he said. She looked down. The paint streak. She made a face, not embarrassed, just the mildly annoyed expression of someone who had done the practical thing and paid the practical price. She looked back up at him, and something in her expression was open in a way that was different from every other version of open he'd seen from her. Not the openness of exhaustion or crisis, not the openness of someone who'd had no choice. The chosen kind. Well, she said. Well, he said back. She almost smiled. That almost smile that was actually a full smile for her, the one he'd learned to read. That was a long time coming. It was. Worth it? He looked at her, at the streak of paint in the tired eyes and the woman who had built something extraordinary and nearly lost it and fought to keep it, and was standing in a repaired basement on a Saturday morning in old clothes, not performing anything for anyone. Yeah, he said, definitely worth it. Whoa. There's a thing that happens to people sometimes, after a long, hard stretch, after the fight is over and the dust has settled and the structure is still standing, where they expect to feel different than they do. They expect a clean line between the before and the after, some moment where everything resets into clarity and ease. And then life keeps being life, with all its ordinary complications and its small irritations and its moments that don't resolve into anything larger than themselves. Grayson and Vivian did not have a clean line. What they had was winter coming, and Maya deciding that Vivian needed to be taught how to make hot chocolate properly because the method she'd been using was, according to 7-year-old food criticism, technically incorrect. What they had was Vivian taking 2 calls during dinner on a Wednesday night because the European institutional clients were in a different time zone and they didn't care what time it was in his kitchen. What they had was a disagreement in December about something small and logistical that became, briefly, about something larger before they talked it through on a Thursday evening while Maya was at his mother's. And the talking through was imperfect and took 2 hours and didn't end with everything resolved, just with both of them clear about what they were actually disagreeing about. What they had was real. And real, Grayson had learned over the years, was better than clean. Real had weight and texture and the specific density of things that would hold under pressure. Real was what you built when you'd already had the other kind, the kind that looked smooth and was hollow, and knew the difference. Maya drew a new picture in January, a house with a fence and a dog and 3 people standing in the yard. She didn't explain who the people were. She put it on the refrigerator next to her other drawings and went to watch her cartoons, and neither Grayson nor Vivian said anything about it directly, but they both saw it. Spring arrived in the usual way. Tentatively, then all at once. The oak trees on Callaway Drive went from bare to green in what felt like a week. The flooded basement of 4 months ago was dry and clean and smelled like fresh paint. The sump pump worked exactly as it was supposed to. One evening in April, Vivian stood in the backyard of 14 Callaway, looking at the repaired fence along the property line. Grayson had replaced 2 posts over the winter. They'd been soft from an old water issue. And she was thinking, in the specific unfocused way she sometimes thought when she wasn't trying to solve anything, about the sequence of events that had brought her here. A hotel room, a house with a fence, a storm, a broken pipe, a man with a toolbox and a sleeping daughter in his truck. The truth hidden inside a wall that had been waiting, on borrowed time, for something to give. She heard the back door of the house across the fence open and close, and then the side gate, and then Grayson was there with 2 coffees from the place on Reardon Street, which he'd been doing since October, and which he did without making it a thing. And she took one without making it a thing, and they stood at the fence in the April evening looking at the yard. Maya wants to plant something, he said. She has opinions about tomatoes. I have a lot of yard, Vivian said. I told her that. Tell her yes. He looked at her. She was looking at the yard, at the space she'd bought for its fence and its privacy and its distance from everything that had been chasing her, and which had become, without her planning it, a place where someone planted tomatoes and a child left drawings on the refrigerator, and coffee appeared in the morning on a counter she hadn't put it on. You okay? He said. It was the question he'd asked her 100 times by now, in different registers and different contexts, from the first night in the basement to the night before the board session to the quiet evenings after. It was never a dramatic question with him, just a real one, asked by someone who actually wanted the actual answer. She thought about what okay meant. Not fine, not handled, not managed. Okay in the real sense, in the sense of standing in a yard in April with coffee she hadn't made, beside a man who showed up with a toolbox on a stormy night and never really left, with the evidence of everything she'd nearly lost and hadn't behind her, and the evidence of everything she hadn't expected in front of her. Yes, she said, and meant it in all the ways there were to mean it. He nodded. He drank his coffee. The trees moved in the early spring wind, and somewhere inside his house a door opened and Maya's voice drifted out, asking something, or announcing something, or beginning the preliminary arguments for a request she intended to make. Neither of them moved. Some things didn't need a resolution so much as they needed a moment of honest recognition, of standing in the ordinary space of an ordinary evening and understanding that this was it. Not the dramatic version, not the clean one, just the true one, with all its weight and texture and the specific kind of beauty that only showed up in things that had been tested and held. A pipe broke. A man came to fix it. A woman opened a wall and found the truth that had been buried inside it. And somewhere in the middle of all the fear and the fighting and the 14 months of damage that had to be undone, 2 people chose each other, not in spite of the difficulty, but in some way that neither of them could have explained cleanly, partly because of it. Because of what they'd seen of each other in the moments when there was no managing left to do. That was the part no one told you about trust. It wasn't built in the easy moments. It was built in the flooded basements and the 11 o'clock phone calls and the crackers on the counter and the hand taken without preamble. In the small, true acts that nobody else was watching, that was where it lived. That was the whole of it.